This morning at the first service, I was compared to Carl Kildall, who would shoot fire and brimstone for about 45 minutes. I won't shoot fire and brimstone, but I probably won't go 45 minutes either. So I'll never be able to complain to the pastor about speaking too long again. Well, happy birthday. It's only been a short 135 years since we've been known as the church in Volga. And I'm going to go through a few slides of what that was like, how it started, where we went from there, and some stories about this ministry that we've had as church, as First Lutheran Church over the years. Now, think back of when this all started back, it was 10 years before South Dakota became a state. It was 2 years before the railroad showed up. In fact, the town side of Volga was a mile north on the Bandy farm, and that white building a mile north, that was the town side of Volga. Yet they had started the church right here on this piece of property. And so this, the first one that was built in 1889, which is the year South Dakota became a state. They met in people's homes for 10 years. The Norwegian Lutherans of South Dakota came across the Missouri River down by Yankton and worked their way north. South Dakota was settled by nationalities in the land between the Sioux River and the Minnesota border, or between the Sioux River and the James River, was pretty much populated by Lutherans, and the churches populated this area. They gave the land west of the Missouri River to the Germans. And so that's why Eureka, Jaffa, and all them towns are found in West River. And that was the old Lutheran Church of America, the German portion of the ELCA. But we were the Norwegian. Our history is long Norwegian. And I've got a sheet in the bulletin of some of the important dates and histories. I'm not going to read that, that's for you. But some of the important things that happened in this congregation. So 10 years after forming in somebody's house, they built this church on this site, right here, and in 1889. And this is the same year that South Dakota became a state. And so you can imagine it was fairly bleak back in those days, what the city of Volga looked like. In fact, that's the first parsonage that was built. It's looking north from the steeple of the church towards north. You see, that's the whole block. That house on the north end, that house still sits up on the corner here. But there was nothing past it. So this was the town of Volga. It was very, very bad, poorly populated at that time. So that's 1891. Parsonage, in fact, that parsonage is still standing. The church sold it back here in the 60s, and it was moved just a block south of the church. Sits on the corner of the county road there. We sold it for $677. A hot deal back in '66 on this building. The second church that was recognized as one of the beginning parts of this church was Bethania, which is called the Berg Church, which is just 4 miles south and a half a mile west, was the Berg Church. And Bethania Lutheran, which closed in the 20s, but that's where we still maintain the Berg Cemetery. That was the name of the pastor who started that church and referred to that as Bethania Lutheran. And the third church was the Norwegian Synod Lutheran Church, was sat, I believe, in the city park is where that church sat. And so the three churches came together with one of the mergers and built and added on to this church. So actually, I guess we could be called First, Second, and Third Lutheran Church in Volga. Make it a lot simpler, wouldn't it? But that's the churches those are the churches that were started here at the beginning of this century that have now become the Norwegian Lutheran Church of Volga, which is what we were known for over 50 years. It's the Norwegian Lutheran Church. That's been our history. Been members of several different denominations up till then. Thinking of the Ebola that we're going through in this country right now and knowing the effects of that as people and the concerns, back in 1918 was the flu epidemic that hit this area. Church was not held for many Sundays through Christmas way into January because of the flu epidemic. Meeting as a congregation, you could die from going to church. And so they suspended all the services. In fact, at the Hillside Cemetery, which is west a mile north of Volga, there's a mass grave of the Donaters. 8 family members passed away in that flu epidemic. And Johnny Donater is one of the children that survived. His farm is just 3 miles west of town here. But here, from some of the documents I've been reading, here's one of the excerpts from one of our history books. We're talking about the flu epidemic. It was customary at that time that the church bell should toll for the departed. If the people listening to the tolling, they would know the age of the departed and could almost know who had passed away, if they knew the illness of any person. The caretaker, Mr. Snavy, was nearly exhausted at times, as there were so many deaths, sometimes several in a week. Can you imagine what that must have been like as a church to go through funerals weren't even held in the spring because of that element? At that time, the church formed with Lake Campbell Lutheran. If you didn't know, we were part of Lake Campbell Lutheran as the parish. Way into the 60s, we were joined together, and the pastor served both congregations at the same time, this congregation and First Lutheran. So we joined, that was done in 1918 and 1920, the family closed. Most of the members of that congregation came to Volga Church. And that's why we are the Lutheran Church of Volga at that time. One of the real tragedies of the time was they were preparing for the Christmas program in the 1930s. And when, of course, there was no running water in the church at any time back in those days, and so they kept the church cold all week long unless there was something going on. And so Mr. Schade probably came up to the church and stoked the furnaces, and by 9:30 in the morning, the thing caught fire, and the church burned to the ground. That was in December 20th, 1930. The bell that was up in top melted in half and fell into the basement. That bell has been recast, and that's the one that's up here right now. It's recast and put back. And if you've never been up in the belfry, it's not for the faint of heart, believe me. You crawl the ricketiest old ladder and go up inside of that thing, and it's an amazing place. But that bell still's up there today, and that's the bell you hear tolled. And that bell has been in this church since 1889. So talk about longevity. Even though it had burned once, it's been recast and put back up. One of our members had told the story of standing on her back porch and watching the flames of the fire, Beulah Peterson, as it burned to the ground that day. They were going to have a rehearsal for the Sunday school program. For the next 9 months, the church was located in the auditorium of the church, which is now the new PAC Center. That's where the church operated for 9 months. That's where Sunday school was, that's where this church operated until they started the new congregation. They started the new building. So here's another excerpt from the history book. For a congregation to lose its house of worship by fire is always a heavy blow. It was especially so coming as it did on the very eve of the Christmas festivities. However, there is often blessings concealed under seemingly disasters, add to providing in this case also. No sooner were the Christmas holidays passed than the congregation laid its plans for a new church. Nor did they make a mistake, which had been all too common, to making a little insurance money, stretching it as far as possible, adding a bit to it, and erecting a building as cheaply as possible. This time, the congregation looked far into the future and built a church which, please God, will stand for many a generation. We're sitting in that church right now. This is what it was done in 1930. Can you imagine the 1930s building a church, borrowing $40,000 in today's dollars is a whole bunch more. I had that number here somewhere. But they would be the equivalent in today's dollars of $626,000 of building this church. And it stood all these times. Can you imagine the 30s, and then what happened after that? The collapse, the banking, the financial crisis, the dirty 30s, World War II, and they paid it off in 13 years. In fact, Lyle Strandy was telling me this morning, he remembers his father was a treasurer. He remembers coming home from church the day they had raised enough money to pay off the church. And Lyle helped count those old dollars as they paid off the church that one Sunday, 14 years later after they built this thing. So it's an amazing thing. Also, another time in our history, in 1946, was the celebration of the coming home of the troops, celebrating the 91 people from this congregation that served in World War II. 91 people out of a congregation of about 600 people served in World War II. 5 of the members of this congregation did not come back, and 2 of them are Howard and his brothers. They did not come back from World War II. But having 91 people from a congregation, one congregation served in World War II. South Dakota has led the nation in per capita involvement in world wars since World War I. We have led the nation in per capita because of towns like Volga, churches like Lutheran, that we answered the call to service. And 5 of those people in this congregation made the supreme sacrifice for their country. Finally, in 1956, the name was changed to the First Lutheran Church. Like I say, it could have been first, second, and third, but it just changed to First Lutheran and the name taking the word Norwegian out of it. They must have saw something in the cards, because this is what the cornerstone looks like on this church. That Norwegian didn't appear on this, even though it was built in 1930, and the name Norwegian wasn't removed until the 50s. So this is the cornerstone in here. We hear stories. There's a time capsule buried in the corner of the church, and we were talking this morning about, I wonder if there's someday we should open that up and see what was in that time capsule that they buried somewhere in the corner of the church. And this was one of the places. In the 60s, the ground, as you can see, that's the church as it sits today. Way to the right side of that picture is the parish unit, which was done in 1956. Borrowed money, in today's dollars, that'd be over $500,000 in money to build that church, build that education unit in 1956. One of the things that I found in history books is that they're always burning mortgages. Every time they build something or do something, then they'd have, you'd think there had been kind of an adversity to fire them. They kept burning mortgages all the time. One of the other calamities that happened here, back to the belfry, is when Jess Alexander, Gene Olson, and Alvin Amberg were up working on the floor of the belfry, and it broke loose, and they fell to the steps below. If you ever look out in the steps on this, right out here, look out how high it is up there. They fell on those steps, and it wasn't carpeted at that time either. And here's an account from the history books. Gene and Alvin were severely injured, and much doctoring was required. The council immediately increased insurance policies to cover any future incidents. Way to go. Way to go, church council. In the 60s, we separated from Lake Campbell Lutheran in 1964. And at that time, the church parsonage was built. Sold the old one for $677 and built the new one. I think that one of the stories about the building of this church that I forgot about was that Gary Denard talked about them. Guess how they dug the basement for this thing? By hand. Pickaxes and shovels. They'd back four-horse teams back in here, fill the wagons with dirt, pull them out into the parking lot, and then shovel it off again. And then he asked him, we asked him how long did it take? Well, not that long. We had all the men working. So that's a lot of picks and shovels to get this built. That's why the parking lot is a little higher than the rest of the block here, is because that's where they put the dirt. In the parsonage, they built that for $24,000, which would be about $170,000 in today's. I remember when Sylvan Graham would back his caterpillar back in the hole and take out scoops of dirt as they dug the basement for the new parsonage. I think George Root built it. Many people in the congregation. They built it for $24,000. We should have been remodeled several times. Although there are pieces that are still the same. I think the covers are exactly the same as they were in 1967. Just withstood the time, test of time and everything. In 1975, we did an amazing thing. This congregation was part of an appeal with 9 other congregations to raise money for world and American missions. Those 10 congregations raised $103,000. What's more startling is that this congregation raised $31,000 raised in the 1970s for world and American missions right out of this congregation. This congregation has always had a strong love for helping the community, helping in the world. The benevolence of this congregation has been a stellar thing to look at over the years. In 1995, they built the new fellowship built. That's the building right in the middle. It's a piers in the middle. And that was done in 1995. Probably had cost about $500,000. In today's dollars, that would probably be about $750,000. It was, again, another jump in faith. It took us several years to pay it off. We didn't pay it off until the early 2000s, but I don't think we ever actually started the mortgage on fire. I'm sure. New auto mortgage was installed just a few years back, and the new heating and cooling system. One of the other things I found, and I had no clue this existed, I didn't realize this, but in 1955, this congregation loaned to College Lutheran Church in San Diego, California, $25,000 to build their church. In today's dollars, that'd be about $222,000. Can you imagine borrowing a congregation in another state, $222,000 to build a church? Amazing, amazing. I contacted the pastor there, Pastor Christina, today. I talked to her this week. They sent me these pictures. That's how that congregation looks today, starting in 1955, from a loan from this congregation. Now, here's the part you can't believe. They are a mile down the street from a college in San Diego. Anybody guess what the name of that college is? SDSU. San Diego State University. You can't make this stuff up. This congregation has had a fellowship with the campus ministry at the other SDSU, the real SDSU in Brookings, since the 70s. We've been on the church's budget for all those years. And at the same time, we started a congregation just down the road from the other SDSU. It's amazing. Been talking with Christina, Pastor Christina, who's been there, just ordained there a couple of years ago. They're ordaining another member of their congregation. They've seen the community just absolutely change when that church was started. And they're going through some really interesting times right now. They look at what does their church look like in the future, after being started so long ago by the help of this congregation. And the other one in the history books is that 6 men, there used to be an organization called Lutheran Brotherhood. And this is the men's organization. And we still have the remnants of the oyster feed and some of the other things we do every year, steak fry and things like that. But that group, 6 men from that organization bought a house in Volga, and with the volunteers from the church, they remodeled it, and they let a family called Emmaus live in it, who eventually bought it. But these are refugees from Latvia after World War II. And so this church has routinely, over the years, helped those that needed help. In fact, we were part of a group many years ago. This is Nancy and I visiting with the Childs. This is the Child family that we sponsored, and this congregation sponsored in 1978. We went to see it last January. One of the great stories of this is that the boy on the right, that's home child. Orvis Linus was the member of this congregation. Orvis and Oral had the Chevrolet dealership, which is downtown. That's just where the new Valley Sports Building is being built right now. And he had a car dealership, and he had an old used car, and he taught Home how to drive. Now, there were some casualties of trees, mailboxes, and a few yards during that driving time, but eventually Home learned how to drive. And believe it or not, he's a bus driver in LA right now. You can't make this up. They also, this is the family. The first 4 children came. They were refugees of Vietnam. They were part of the boat people moved in the 70s after the war in Vietnam. They were transferred to Malaysia, where they spent a year in a refugee camp, and then came with a loan from LSS for the value of their ticket. They came with their clothes on their back and a loan on for their plane ticket to South Dakota. We sponsored them. Many of the people in this congregation donated time and help and taught English and everything to get these people on their feet. They eventually stayed for many years here. Next year, following year, we got the rest of the family, the Child family, to Volga, Rapid City, Arlington, Sinai, and Brookings. Finally got the whole family, and this is the whole Child family. As we saw it on the wedding picture of the youngest daughter. The father has passed away. In fact, they have made gifts back to this congregation for the endowment in honor of their parents. And this congregation, we never forgot this congregation. They own Child's AMP store in Los Angeles. The first one was burned down during the Rodney King riots. Yet they went right down the street and purchased another one, and the whole family works in this store. This is Fong and Bowie and their older brother work in the store. This is that Child's AMP, and run by the Child family. It's an amazing, amazing place. One of the other things this congregation did back in, I believe in the 90s, was the Lutheran Social Services built a new center for children and youth. This congregation was involved in the fundraiser. This new facility is just north of the state pen in Sioux Falls, and it cares for children from displaced homes for all kinds of reasons. And this is one of the bedrooms in that LSS. Not one, but 2 bedrooms were funded. Over $30,000 was raised from this congregation to put in 2 bedrooms. So I went there this week and took pictures of this bedroom. I got to meet the young man who was living in that bedroom. And I'm telling you, it was kind of neat. It wasn't messy at all. It was kind of keeping it clean, so that's about it. But there's 2. But you can know that every night there's 2 children in Sioux Falls going to bed in your bedroom and are being cared for by different services on your behalf. You will probably never get to meet these kids. That's the true act of philanthropy, when you give to somebody you'll never meet. And these are kids that you'll probably never meet, but you're giving them a hand when they most need it. held a lot of things here at First Lutheran in Volga. These are the different nationalities or church bodies we were a part of. Names come and go, synods come and go, church denominations come and go, but First Lutheran is still here. And I'm sure those names will keep changing over the years. And I'm guessing First Lutheran will still be here doing the ministry it's done all these years. Can you imagine 2,250 people baptized here in this congregation? Almost that many confirmed out of this congregation. This congregation has had a ministry of the future for years and years and years. So we rejoice. Some of the great stories of First Lutheran is one. Some of them I remember. Some I've asked people about. One of them was there was a teacher in Volga called Mori Magnus. He was a World War II veteran, through P-47s in the war, shot down, became a prisoner of war. But he's a teacher here in Volga, and he ran the clock at the football game. And so back in those days, when the first half ended, it was a gun. It shot blanks, but it was a pistol. And so one Friday night, the gun went off and the clock ended. Somebody threw a dead duck out on the field, and the conservation officer came to arrest him for shooting ducks out of season. Some of you remember Pearl Hesley and her involvement here as a superintendent of Sunday school. If you look in the parish unit, the windows that go into the rooms, now you know exactly how high she was. But they were perfectly so she could look in and see if we were acting good. In fact, Gary Knudsen and I can tell you some stories about her coming to the door and straightening at least him up, not me. She also was the first person to instigate a smoking ban in South Dakota. She kicked Pastor Schmidt, my dad, Gary's dad, Gino and some others, Arnie Knudsen, out of the pastor's study because they were smoking during Sunday school. This is winter. She threw them out of smoke in the early 60s. Tells you a little bit about her. Our confirmation pastor back then was Art Schmidt. He loved basketball. And he was at every game that Volga ever had. And so one time he took a confirmation class. He just loved to go to a basketball game. He took us, the whole confirmation class to Sioux Falls to see the Augustana Vikings play. And I don't remember who they were playing, but the opposing center was just hanging over the Norwegian Viking Lutheran center for Augustana. And finally the guy had enough of it. And he turns around and smacks the guy next to him. And Art Schmidt jumps up out of the stands and says, "This is our time!" And he apologized all the way home. I saw him about 15 years ago. He became a pastor at Stickney, South Dakota. And we went to Nancy's nephew's basketball game. Guess who was running the clock? I told him, I said, "You finally found a way to get into basketball games free, didn't you?" We had a great laugh. And so he was a great mentor for us in our confirmation class. And he was just one of the classic guys that has come through this congregation. Dozens of pastors that have served this congregation. One of the things, this eternal flame, one of the great stories is that eternal flame was given by Harry and Esther Olson. They passed away the very same week back in the 60s. And they gave this eternal flame on behalf of Harry and Esther, the family of the Olson family. In fact, their son, you may have heard of, John Olson, he was actually a candidate for governor of South Dakota at one time, but worked at the Eye Institute in Rapid City for many, many years. But their father, they gave it, they honored them. And so many years back, Laura was saying, "How come we keep buying these candles? I mean, it costs like $200 a year to keep this candle burning at the front of the church. Anybody thought about turning it to electricity?" And we said, "Well, why not?" So I was commissioned to go talk to my uncle, Ken Schade, who was married to Esther and Harry's daughter, Margaret. And so I went to Rapid City and I asked him, I said, "Would the family be okay if we converted that eternal flame to electricity?" And he just laughed. He said, "You know the answer to that. Jim, he was the city electrician for the city of Volga. You'd be honored." And so they did. They still electric ever since. He ran the power plant, which is a building north of 91st on Main Street, where there were three diesel generators that powered electricity before Rural Electric. He ran on those three generators for many, many years. So he would be proud of that. We had one of the coolest tragedies here was one Sunday morning there was this calamity in the basement. And the expansion tank off the old boiler had fallen off the wall and sheared off ruptured the gas main, the natural gas main, and is pouring natural gas into the basement. And they evacuated the church immediately, and everybody went outside, stood around, and somebody said, we got to shut off the gas. And so Roy Van Mountain found a crescent wrench in the back of his pickup, went downstairs, and went out back and shut off the gas main. But can you imagine if this place would have exploded full of gas? This thing's made out of brick. It'd be the biggest grenade you've ever seen in your life. It would have been a horrendous accident that would have happened if this place would have, one light switch would have been turned on by that gas main. So, praise be to somebody thinking fast and saving them. Could have been hundreds of people killed in an accident. One final thing I remember being a Lutheran leader here, and the events of Lutheran league were always quite cherished. I remember getting in the back of Stanley Hesby's truck. He probably hauled cattle or hogs that week, and full of hay bales, and he up to Oakwood we'd go for a marshmallow roast and a campfire or something like that. We'd get up there and he'd raise the hoist, the back end would open up and dump all every 30 Lutheran kids on the ground. I can't believe nobody ever got hurt. It's just phenomenal. One last thing, as a quote from a history book of this church, which is very appropriate today when we think about our history, we think about the saints of this church and why we're here today. In our rejoicing, may we be mindful that during the past years, the Holy Spirit has been at work through the Word and Sacraments, moving men and women to establish and maintain this congregation. Let us remember that we belong to a historical family with a rich heritage. Here we stand on a movable rock, worship God as our Mother and Father before us, and God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Will those that follow us